Sketches of the Fair Sex in all Parts of the World, by Anonymous. Section 16. Origin of Nunneries. Soon after the introduction of Christianity, St. Mark is said to have founded a society called Therapeutes, who dwelt by the lake Moeris in Egypt, and devoted themselves to solitude and religious offices. About the year 305 of the Christian computation, St. Anthony, being persecuted by Diocletian, retired into the desert near the lake Moeris. Numbers of people soon followed his example, joined themselves to the Therapeutes, St. Anthony being placed at their head, and improving upon their rules. First formed them into regular monasteries, and enjoined them to live in mortification and chastity. About the same time, or soon after, St. Synclitica, resolved not to be behind St. Anthony in her zeal for chastity, is generally believed to have collected together a number of enthusiastic females, and to have founded the first nunnery for their reception. Some imagine the scheme of celibacy was concerted between St. Anthony and St. Synclitica, as St. Anthony, on his first retiring into solitude, is said to have put his sister into a nunnery, which must have been that of St. Synclitica. But however this be, from their institution, monks and nuns increased so fast that in the city of Orixa, about 17 years after the death of St. Anthony, there were 20,000 virgins devoted to celibacy. Such at this time was the rage of celibacy, a rage which, however unnatural, will cease to excite our wonder when we consider that it was accounted by both sexes the sure and only infallible road to heaven and eternal happiness. And as such, it behoved the Church vigorously to maintain and countenance it, which she did by beginning about this time to deny the liberty of marriage to her sons. In the first Council of Nice, held soon after the introduction of Christianity, the celibacy of the clergy was strenuously argued for, and some think that even in an earlier period it had been the subject of debate. However this be, it was not agreed to in the Council of Nice, though at the end of the 4th century it is said that Siricius, Bishop of Rome, enacted the first decree against the marriage of monks, a decree which was not universally received. For several centuries after, we find that it was not uncommon for clergymen to have wives. Even the popes were allowed this liberty, as it is said in some of the old statutes of the Church that it was lawful for the pope to marry a virgin for the sake of having children. So exceedingly difficult is it to combat against nature, that little regard seems to have been paid to this decree of Siricius, for we are informed that several centuries after it was no uncommon thing for the clergy to have wives, and perhaps even a plurality of them, as we find it among the ordinances of Pope Sylvester that every priest should be the husband of one wife only, and Pius II affirmed that though many strong reasons might be adduced in support of the celibacy of the clergy, there were still stronger reasons against it. Description of the great convent at Ayuda in Rio Janeiro. At the end of the chapel is a large quadrangle entered by a massive gateway, surrounded by 3 stories of grated windows. Here female negro peddlers come with their goods, and expose them in the courtyard below. The nuns, from their grated windows above, see what they like, and letting down a cord, the article is fastened to it. It is then drawn up and examined, and if approved of, the price is let down. Some that I saw in the act of buying and selling in this way were very merry, joking and laughing with the blacks below, and did not seem at all indisposed to do the same with my companion. In 3 of the lower windows, on a level with the courtyard, are revolving cupboards, like half-barrels, and at the back of each is a plate of tin, perforated like the top of a nutmeg grater. The nuns of this convent are celebrated for making sweet confectionery which people purchase. There is a bell which the purchaser applies to, and a nun peeps through the perforated tin. She then lays the dish on a shelf of the revolving cupboard, and turns it inside out. The dish is taken, the price laid in its place, and it is turned in. While we stood there, the invisible lady warder asked for a pinch of snuff. The box was laid down in the same way, and turned in and out. Ceremony of the initiation of a nun. The disposition to take the veil, even among young girls, is not uncommon in Brazil. The opposition of friends can prevent it until they are 25 years old, but after that time they are considered competent to decide for themselves. A writer describes the initiation of a young lady whose wealthy parents were extremely reluctant to have her take the vow. She held a lighted torch in her hand in imitation of the prudent virgins, and when the priest chanted, "Your spouse approaches, come forth and meet him," she approached the altar singing, "I follow with my whole heart," and, accompanied by 2 nuns already professed, she knelt before the bishop. She seemed very lovely, with an unusually sweet, gentle, and pensive countenance. She did not look particularly or deeply affected, but when she sung her responses there was something exceedingly mournful in the soft, tremulous, and timid tones of her voice. The bishop now exhorted her to make a public profession of her vows before the congregation, and said, "Will you persevere in your purpose of holy chastity?" She blushed deeply, and with a downcast look, lowly but firmly answered, "I will." He again said more distinctly, "Do you promise to preserve it?" And she replied more emphatically, "I do promise." The bishop then said, "Thanks be to God," and she bent forward and reverently kissed his hand, while he asked her, "Will you be blessed and consecrated?" She replied, "Oh, I wish it." The habiliments, in which she was hereafter to be clothed, were sanctified by the aspersion of holy water. Then followed several prayers to God, that, as he had blessed the garments of Aaron with ointment which flowed from his head to his beard, so he would now bless the garments of his servant with the copious dew of his benediction. When the garment was thus blessed, the girl retired with it, and having laid aside the dress in which she had appeared, she returned arrayed in her new attire, except her veil. A gold ring was next provided, and consecrated with a prayer, that she who wore it might be fortified with celestial virtue, to preserve a pure faith and incorrupt fidelity to her spouse Jesus Christ. He last took the veil, and her female attendants having uncovered her head, he threw it over her, so that it fell on her shoulders and bosom, and said, "Receive this sacred veil, under the shadow of which you may learn to despise the world, and submit yourself truly and with all humility of heart to your spouse." To which she sung a response, in a very sweet, soft, and touching voice, "He has placed this veil before my face, that I should see no lover but himself." The bishop now kindly took her hand, and held it while the following hymn was chanted by the choir with great harmony: "Beloved spouse, come, the winter is past, the turtle sings, and the blooming vines are redolent of summer." A crown, a necklace, and other female ornaments were now taken by the bishop and separately blessed, and the girl bending forward, he placed them on her head and neck, praying that she might be thought worthy to be enrolled into the society of the 144,000 virgins who preserved their chastity and did not mix with the society of impure women. Last of all, he placed the ring on the middle finger of her right hand, and solemnly said, "So I marry you to Jesus, who will henceforth be your protector. Receive this ring, the pledge of your faith, that you may be called the spouse of God." She fell on her knees and sung, "I am married to him whom angels serve, whose beauty the sun and moon admire." Then, rising, and showing with exultation her right hand, she said emphatically, as if to impress it on the attention of the congregation, "My Lord has wedded me with this ring, and decorated me with a crown as his spouse. I here renounce and despise all earthly ornaments for his sake, whom alone I see, whom alone I love, in whom alone I trust, and to whom alone I give all my affections. My heart hath uttered a good word. I speak of the deed I have done for my king." The bishop then pronounced a general benediction, and retired up to the altar, while the nun professed was borne off between her friends with lighted tapers and garlands waving. End of section 16.
Recording by Summer Days. Sketches of the fair sex in all parts of the world, by Anonymous. Wedded love is infinitely preferable to variety. Hail, wedded love, mysterious law, true source of human offspring, sole propriety, in paradise of all things common else. By thee, adulterous lust was driven from men, among the bestial herds to range. By thee, founded in reason, loyal, just, and pure, relations dear, and all the charities of father, son, and brother first were known. Thou art the fountain of domestic sweets, whose bed is undefiled and chaste pronounced. Here love his golden shafts employs, here lights his constant lamp, and waves his purple wings, reigns here and revels. Not in the bought smile of harlots, loveless, joyless, unendeared, casual fruition, nor in court amours, mixed dance, or wanton mask, or midnight ball, or serenade, which the starved lover sings to his proud fair, best quitted with disdain. Italian debauchery. If chastity is none of the most shining virtues of the French, it is still less so of the Italians. Almost all the travelers who have visited Italy agree in describing it as the most abandoned of all the countries of Europe. At Venice, at Naples, and indeed in almost every part of Italy, women are taught from their infancy the various arts of alluring to their arms the young and unwary, and of obtaining from them, while heated by love or wine, everything that flattery and false smiles can obtain in those unguarded moments. And so little infamous is the trade of prostitution, and so venal the women, that hardly any rank or condition set them above being bribed to it. Nay, they are frequently assisted by their male friends and acquaintances to drive a good bargain. Nor does their career of debauchery finish with their unmarried state. The vows of fidelity which they make at the altar are like the vows and oaths made upon too many other occasions, only considered as nugatory forms, which law has obliged them to take, but custom absolved them from performing. They even claim and enjoy greater liberties after marriage than before. Every married woman has a cicisbei, or gallant, who attends her to all public places, hands her in and out of her carriage, picks up her gloves or fan, and 1,000 other little offices of the same natures. But this is only his public employment, as a reward for which he is entitled to have the lady as often as he pleases, at a place of retirement sacred to themselves, where no person, not even the most intrusive husband, must enter, to be witness of what passes between them. This has been considered by people of other nations as a custom not altogether consistent with chastity and purity of manners. The Italians themselves, however, endeavor to justify it in their conversations with strangers, and Baretti has of late years published a formal vindication of it to the world. In this vindication he has not only deduced the original of it from pure platonic love, but would willingly persuade us that it is still continued upon the same mental principles. A doctrine which the world will hardly be credulous enough to swallow, even though he should offer more convincing arguments to support it than he has already done. Naked fakirs. So different over all the world are the sects of saints as well as of sinners, that besides the Brahmins, a set of innocent and religious priests, who have rendered their women virtuous by treating them with kindness and humanity, there are another sect of religio-philosophical drones called fakirs, who contribute as much as they can to debauch the sex, under a pretense of superior sanctity. These hypocritical saints, like some of the ridiculous sects which formerly existed in Europe, wear no clothes, considering them only as proper appendages to sinners, who are ashamed because they are sensible of guilt, while they, being free from every stain of pollution, have no shame to cover. In this original state of nature, these idle and pretended devotees assemble together sometimes in armies of 10 or 12,000, and under a pretense of going in pilgrimage to certain temples, like locusts, devour everything on their way, the men flying before them and carrying all that they can out of the reach of their depredations, while the women, not in the least afraid of a naked army of lusty saints, throw themselves in their way, or remain quietly at home to receive them. It has long been an opinion well established all over India that there is not in nature so powerful a remedy for removing the sterility of women as the prayers of these sturdy naked saints. On this account, barren women constantly apply to them for assistance, which when the good-natured fakir has an indication to grant, he leaves his slipper or his staff at the door of the lady's apartment with whom he is praying, a symbol so sacred that it effectually prevents anyone from violating the secrecy of their devotion. But should he forget this signal, and at the same time be distant from the protection of his brethren, a sound drubbing is frequently the reward of his pious endeavors. But though they venture sometimes in Hindostan to treat a fakir in this unholy manner in other parts of Asia and Africa, such is the veneration in which these lusty saints are held, that they not only have access when they please to perform private devotions with barren women, but are accounted so holy that they may, at any time, in public or private, confer a personal favor upon a woman, without bringing upon her either shame or guilt, and no woman dare refuse to gratify their passion. Nor, indeed, has anyone an inclination of this kind, because she, upon whom this personal favor has been conferred, is considered by herself and by all the people as having been sanctified and made more holy by the action. So much concerning the conduct of the fakirs in debauching women seems certain. But it is by travelers further related that wherever they find a woman who is exceedingly handsome, they carry her off privately to one of their temples, but in such a manner as to make her and the people believe that she is carried away by the god who is there worshipped, who, being violently in love with her, took that method to procure her for his wife. This done, they perform a nuptial ceremony and make her further believe that she is married to the god, when, in reality, she is only married to one of the fakirs who personates him. Women who are treated in this manner are revered by the people as the wives of the god, and by that stratagem secured solely to the fakirs, who have cunning enough to impose themselves as gods upon some of these women through the whole of their lives. In countries where reason is stronger than superstition, we almost think this impossible. Where the contrary is the case, there is nothing too hard to be credited. Something like this was done by the priests of ancient Greece and Rome, and a few centuries ago, tricks of the same nature were practiced by the monks and other libertines upon some of the visionary and enthusiastic women of Europe. Hence, we need not think it strange if the fakirs generally succeed in attempts of this nature, when we consider that they only have to deceive a people brought up in the most consummate ignorance, and that nothing can be more flattering to a female vanity than for a woman to suppose herself such a peculiar favorite of the divinity she worships as to be chosen from all her companions to the honor of being admitted to his embraces, a favor which her self-admiration will dispose her more readily to believe than examine. Mahometan plurality of wives. But it is not the religion of the Hindus only that is unfavorable to chastity. That of Muhammad, which now prevails over a great part of India, is unfavorable to it likewise. Mohammedanism everywhere indulges men with a plurality of wives, while it ties down the women to the strictest conjugal fidelity. Hence, while the men riot in unlimited variety, the women are in great numbers confined to share among them the scanty favors of one man only. This unnatural and impolitic conduct induces them to seek by art and intrigue what they are denied by the laws of their prophet. As polygamy prevails over all Asia, this art and intrigue follow as the consequence of it. Some have imagined that it is the result of climate, but it rather appears to be the result of the injustice which women suffer by polygamy. For it seems to reign, as much in Constantinople and in every other place where polygamy is in fashion, as it does on the banks of the Ganges or the Indus. The famous Montesquieu, whose system was that the passions are entirely regulated by the climate, brings as proof of this system a story from the collection of voyages for the establishment of an East India Company, in which it is said that at Patan, quote, "the wanton desires of their women are so outrageous that the men are obliged to make use of a certain apparel to shelter them from their designs." End quote. Were this story really true, it would be but a partial proof of the effect of the climate, for why should the burning suns of Patan only influence the passions of the fair? Why should they there transport that sex beyond decency, which in all other climates is the most decent, and leave in so cool and defensive a state that sex which in all other climates is apt to be the most offensive and indecent? To whatever length the spirit of intrigue may be carried in Asia and Africa, however the passions of the women may prompt them to excite desire, and to throw themselves in the way of gratification, we have the strongest reasons to reprobate all these stories, which would make us believe that they are so lost to decency as to attack the other sex. Such a system would be overturning nature and inverting the established laws by which she governs the world. End of section 17. Recording by Summer Days. Recording by Summer Days. Sketches of the fair sex in all parts of the world by Anonymous. Women of Otahiti. In Otahiti, an island in the Southern Ocean, we are presented with women of a singular character. As far as we can recollect, we think it is a pretty general rule that whatever the sex are accustomed to be constantly clothed, they are ashamed to appear naked. Those of Otahiti seem, however, to be an exception to this rule. To show themselves in public, with or without clothing, appears to be to them a matter of equal indifference, and the exposition of any part of their bodies is not attended with the least backwardness or reluctance. Circumstances from which we may reasonably infer that among them clothes were not originally invented to cover shame, but either as ornaments or as a defense against the cold. But a still more striking singularity in the character of these women, and which distinguishes them not only from the females of all other nations, but likewise from those of almost all other animals, is their performing in public those rites which in almost every other part of the globe are performed in privacy and retirement. Whether this is the effect of innocence, or of a dissoluteness of manners to which no other people have yet arrived, remains still to be discovered. That they are dissolute, even beyond anything we have hitherto recorded, is but too certain. As polygamy is not allowed among them, to satisfy the lust of variety, they have a society called allure, in which every woman is common to every man, and when any of these women happens to have a child, it is smothered in the moment of its birth, that it may not interrupt the pleasures of its infamous mother. But in this juncture, should nature relent at so horrid a deed, even then the mother is not allowed to save her child unless she can find a man who will patronize it as a father, in which case the man is considered as having appropriated the woman to himself, and she is accordingly extruded from this hopeful society. These few anecdotes sufficiently characterize the women of this island. Crim-Con of Claudia and Pompeia. Our own times furnish us with an instance of a ceremony from which all women are carefully excluded, that is, masonry. But the Roman ladies, in performing the rites sacred to the good goddess, were even more afraid of the men than our masons are of women. For we are told by some authors that so cautious were they of concealment, that even the statues and pictures of men and other male animals were hoodwinked with a thick veil. The house of the consul, though commonly so large that they might have been perfectly secured against all intrusion in some remote apartment of it, was obliged to be evacuated by all male animals, and even the consul himself was not suffered to remain in it. Before they began their ceremonies, every corner and lurking place in the house was carefully searched, and no caution omitted to prevent all possibility of being discovered by impertinent curiosity, or disturbed by presumptive intrusion. But these cautions were not all the guard that was placed around them. The laws of the Romans made it death for any man to be present at the solemnity. Such being the precautions, and such the penalties for ensuring the secrecy of the ceremony, it was only once attempted to be violated, though it existed from the foundation of the Roman Empire till the introduction of Christianity. And this attempt was made, not so much perhaps with a view to be present at the ceremony, as to fulfill an assignation with a mistress. Pompeia, the wife of Caesar, having been suspected of a criminal correspondence with Claudius, and so closely watched that she could find no opportunity of gratifying her passion, at last, by the means of a female slave, settled an assignation with him at the celebration of the rites of the good goddess. Claudius was directed to come in the habit of a singing girl, a character he could easily personate, being young and of a fair complexion. As soon as the slave saw him enter, she ran to inform her mistress. The mistress, eager to meet her lover, immediately left the company and threw herself into his arms, but could not be prevailed upon him to return so soon as he thought necessary for their mutual safety. Upon which he left her, and began to take a walk through the rooms, always avoiding the light as much as possible. While he was thus walking by himself, a maidservant accosted him, and desired him to sing. He took no notice of her, but she followed, and urging him so closely that he was at last obliged to speak. His voice betrayed his sex. The maidservant shrieked, and running into the room where the rites were performing, told that a man was in the house. The women, in the utmost consternation, threw a veil over the mysteries, ordered the doors to be secured, and with lights in their hands, ran about the house searching for the sacrilegious intruder. They found him in the apartment of the slave who had admitted him, drove him out with ignominy, and though it was in the middle of the night, immediately dispersed to give an account to their husbands of what had happened. Claudius was soon after accused of having profaned the holy rites, but the populace declaring in his favor, the judges, fearing an insurrection, were obliged to acquit him. A word to a very nice class of ladies. There is amongst us a female character, not uncommon, which we denominate the outrageously virtuous. Women of this stamp never fail to seize all opportunities of exclaiming, in the bitterest manner, against every one upon whom even the slightest suspicion of indiscretion or unchastity has fallen, taking care as they go along to magnify every molehill into a mountain, and every thoughtless freedom into the blackest of crimes. But besides the illiberality of thus treating such as may frequently be innocent, you may credit us, dear countrywomen, when we aver, that such a behaviour, instead of making you appear more virtuous, only draws down upon you, by those who know the world, suspicions not much to your advantage. Your sex are in general suspected by ours of being too much addicted to scandal and defamation, a suspicion which has not arisen of late years, as we find in the ancient laws of England a punishment, known by the name of ducking-stool, annexed to scolding and defamation in the women, though no such punishment nor crime is taken notice of in the men. This crime, however, we persuade ourselves, you are less guilty of than is commonly believed. But there is another of a nature not more excusable, from which we cannot so much exculpate you, which is, that harsh and forbidding appearance you put on, and that ill treatment, which you no doubt think necessary for the illustration of your own virtue, you should bestow on every one of your sex who has deviated from the path of rectitude. A behaviour of this nature, besides being so opposite to that meek and gentle spirit which should distinguish female nature, is in every respect contrary to the charitable and forgiving temper of the Christian religion, and infallibly shuts the door of repentance against an unfortunate sister, willing, perhaps, to abandon the vices into which heedless advertency had plunged her, and from which none of you can promise yourselves an absolute security. We wish not, fair countrywomen, like the declaimer and satirist, to paint you all vice and imperfection, nor, like the venal panegyrist, to exhibit you all virtue. As impartial historians, we confess that you have, in the present age, many virtues and good qualities, which were either nearly or altogether unknown to your ancestors. But do you not also exceed them in some follies and vices also? Is not the levity, dissipation, and extravagance of the women of this century arrived to a pitch unknown and unheard of in former times? Is not the course which you steer in life almost entirely directed by vanity and fashion? And are there not too many of you who, throwing aside reason and good conduct, and despising the counsel of your friends and relations, seem determined to follow the mode of the world, however it may be mixed with vice? Do not the generality of you dress and appear above your station, and are not many of you ashamed to be seen performing the duties of it? To sum up all, do not too many of you act as if you thought the care of the family, and the other domestic virtues beneath your attention, and that the sole end for which you were sent into the world was to please and divert yourselves, at the expense of those poor wretches the men, whom you consider as obliged to support you in every kind of idleness and extravagance. While such is your conduct, and while the contagion is every day increasing, you are not to be surprised if the men, still fond of you as playthings in the hours of mirth and revelry, ever shun serious connection with you, and while they wish to be possessed of your charms, are so much afraid of your manners and conduct that they prefer the cheerless state of a bachelor to the numberless evils arising from being tied to a modern wife. End of section 18. Recording by Summer Days.